You've seen the pictures, right? Russian and Chinese leaders standing shoulder to shoulder. It paints a picture of this unbreakable axis, a new global powerhouse ready to take on the West. But what's the real story behind all the grand statements? Okay, let's really dig into this and separate the myth from the reality of the Russia-China military relationship.
It all kind of kicked into high gear with this statement. I mean, wow. Just weeks before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin and Xi put this out. That phrase, no limits friendship, it just went everywhere. And the timing was everything. It looks like two massive powers were lining up, completely unified against their rivals.
And believe me, this isn't just talk. We've seen them put on a real show. We're talking joint strategic bomber patrols flying over the Pacific, huge military parades with all the latest and greatest hardware. These displays are absolutely designed to send a message of overwhelming unified strength. So this brings us to the big question, the one at the heart of this explainer. Is this what it looks like on the surface? You know, a formal, ironclad military alliance? Or is there something, I don't know, a little more complicated going on underneath all the pageantry?
To really answer that, we first have to get our terms straight. An alliance, think NATO, has a formal mutual defense treaty. An attack on one is an attack on all, period. A partnership, on the other hand, is all about strategic cooperation, but it doesn't have that supercritical binding defense clause. And this is the key. The 2001 treaty between China and Russia, it specifically does not have a mutual defense pact.
So just how deep does this cooperation actually go? Well, analysis from the CNA Corporation gives us this really clear way of looking at it. You can see when it comes to things like regular talks and joint drills, yeah, cooperation is high. But as you move up the ladder to more advanced stuff like an integrated military command, it's low and only happens once in a while. And that final step, a common defense policy that makes a true alliance, it's just absent. So if it's not a full-blown alliance, what exactly is it? Well, their cooperation really stands on three main pillars. They're always talking politics, they share and sell military tech, and they practice together in joint exercises. Let's take a look at each of these. For a long time, the flow of military tech was pretty much a one-way street. Russia, with that huge Soviet legacy, was the clear senior partner. They were the ones selling the fancy stuff, like Su-35 fighter jets and S-400 missile systems to China. And that was the bedrock of their military relationship for decades.
But after 2022, everything changed. I mean, the script completely flipped. This chart just lays it all out. With all the Western sanctions piling up, Russia became incredibly dependent on China for things like dual-use technologies and electronics, the components it desperately needed to keep its war effort and its entire economy from collapsing. The junior partner suddenly became the senior partner. And we see a really similar story with their joint military exercises. They started off pretty small, but then from about 2014 to 2019, they just exploded in size and complexity. They were everywhere from the Baltics to the South China Sea. For China's military, the PLA, these exercises are an absolute golden opportunity to learn from the Russians, who have fresh, real-world combat experience in places like Syria and Ukraine.
But, and this is a really important finding from that CNA report, that explosive growth seems to have hit a ceiling. Since around 2019, their military cooperation has pretty much plateaued. Don't get me wrong, they're still working together at a high level, but they aren't really getting any closer or more integrated.
So why the slowdown?
Well, a few things are going on. First, China's own defense industry is now incredibly sophisticated. Frankly, it just doesn't need as much from Russia anymore. Second, Russia is still pretty protective of its absolute best crown jewel technologies. And third, China is playing a very careful game. It's giving Russia support, but it's been super cautious to not cross any lines that would trigger crippling Western sanctions on its own economy. Maybe nothing shows the limits of this no-limits friendship better than how they think about nuclear weapons. It's a huge difference. Russia says it has the right to use nukes first, even in a conventional war. China, on the other hand, has a strict no-first-use policy. That is a fundamental strategic gap that proves they're not some monolithic bloc with one shared defense policy. So when you put all of this together, you get a totally new dynamic. What we're really looking at today is a partnership that's becoming more and more unequal. And in this new arrangement, Russia is very clearly the junior partner. It's relying on China as an economic lifeline to survive sanctions. It needs Chinese tech just to keep its military running. And in return, what does it offer? Well, it provides China with cheap energy and valuable lessons from its wars.
So, what's in it for China? Why does this lopsided deal work for them? Well, it all comes down to their #1 strategic goal. This map here from the US Army shows what China is really focused on: building this counter-intervention bubble to keep the US out of the Western Pacific. And from that point of view, having a friendly Russia is a huge help. It distracts the US, it secures China's northern border, and it provides resources. Russia is directly serving Beijing's main goal.
So that leaves us with this final thought. The relationship might not be a true alliance, but for Beijing, it might be something even more valuable. As Russia gets more and more dependent, it starts to look less like a partner and more like a powerful strategic asset, an asset that China can use to push its own long-term ambitions on the world stage. The question really isn't just about what they do together anymore, but how China will use this very unequal partnership to its own advantage.